Hey everybody, this is John, and I'm joining you once again to talk about eschatology. But before we do this week, I need to get into the proper costume. Hang on 1 second. Let's do this. Okay, so you may be wondering why I'm wearing the near fedora here and why I'm playing the Indiana Jones theme. Well, it's because of a question that my fellow columnist E. Stephen Burnett asked 2 weeks ago during the Rapture video. He asked the following question: if you had to write out a lineup of events before/around Christ's return, you know, one of those charts with arrows, etc., what would it look like? And I promised him that I would answer that question, and to do so, I felt I had to play dress up. Okay, it's a little silly, it's a little gimmicky, but that's neither here nor there. To answer your question, Stephen, the question that you're asking refers to all of the charts that get made by dispensational premillennialists. If you go into the bookstore and go to the biblical prophecy section and you pick up a book written by a dispensational premillennialist and you start flipping through it, you're going to find a chart in there. As a matter of fact, you could probably find a book that's nothing but charts about the end times. And so I'm assuming you're asking what an amillennialist chart would look like. Well, hang on a second. Let me draw you one. I should warn you that I'm not a good artist. Hey, Stephen, it'd look like this. Yeah, okay, that's Jesus. What I mean to say by that is this, is that amillennialists really aren't that big on charts. And as a matter of fact, I'm really not that big on charts because of what Jesus had to say in the book of Matthew, Mark, about date setting, specifically that no one knows the date or the time. And you might say, well, what does that have to do with charts? Well, what all those charts that get produced in Christian books remind me of is a scene from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. If you haven't seen it for a while, go watch it. It's a good movie. I'll wait. In Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Indy is sent the Grail diary by his father before his father disappears in Venice. Indy takes up the quest to find the resting place of the Holy Grail, and in doing so he finds the grave and the last resting place of a crusading knight. In the crusading knight's sarcophagus, or coffin, or whatever you want to call it, Indy finds the name of a city, Alexandretta. And Indy says, well, that's great. That's where we start our journey to find the Grail. Now, how do we find the Grail itself? And Marcus Brody, in a rare moment of insight, says that Indy's father not only knew, but he had drawn a map with no names. By reading the legends surrounding the Holy Grail, Henry Jones Sr. had pieced together a map. You start at this city, you head south through the desert, you come to the Valley of the Crescent Moon, and you find the last resting place of the Grail, which looks suspiciously like the city of Petra. Henry Jones Sr. had figured out everything there was to know about that map, how to find the Grail. He was just missing one vital piece of data, the name of the city. Now that Indy had the name of the city, he could plug it in and he would be able to find the Grail, which he eventually does. Now, I think that's what a lot of dispensational premillennialists do when it comes to the signs of the times. And what I mean by that is this, is that they know that they are not supposed to come up with dates and times and stuff like that. Well, most of them know that. But that doesn't stop them. Instead, they go pouring through the scriptures and they try to put together a chart with no dates, so to speak, where they have everything figured out to the last minute of what's going to happen before Jesus returns. But all they're missing is the date that it all kicks off. If you want to see what I'm talking about, read the Left Behind book, the actual one called Left Behind. It's been a long time since I've read it, but I specifically remember that after the rapture happens and everybody's freaking out, the main characters go and find this rapture video thing, and in the rapture video, a raptured pastor outlines exactly what's going to happen over the next 7 years. And he says, now you can figure it out because you know the date that it all starts. That chart making is a way to get around what Jesus says. And I think, this is my own personal, not so humble opinion, that making charts of what's going to happen in the end times, first of all, is a violation of the spirit, if not the letter, of Jesus' statement that no one knows the hour. And not only that, but I think it misses the point of what the signs actually mean. To see what I'm talking about, we're going to look at some of the signs that I think are the clearest signs of the times. I mean, discussing what the signs of the times are can be kind of tricky because people have different lists that they pull from different parts of the Bible, and people don't agree on whether or not they're signs. For example, a lot of people might pull from the book of Ezekiel or Daniel, and I'm not sure that's entirely valid, and that's a larger subject for another discussion someday. But instead, I think we're going to focus our attention very narrowly, specifically on what's called the Olivet Discourse. We've talked about the Olivet Discourse in a previous video. Specifically, the Olivet Discourse happens during Holy Week. Jesus has made his triumphant entry into the city. He's gone up into the Temple Mount, and he's been confronted by his enemies one last time. And then his disciples go sightseeing. They look at the buildings around them, the beautiful, wonderful buildings, and they say, "Teacher, look at the wonderful buildings." And Jesus says, "Do you see all these things? I tell you, not one stone will be left upon another." Okay. Afterwards, Jesus goes out to the Mount of Olives. He sits down. The disciples come to him and they say, "What will the signs be that this is about to happen? And what will be the signs of your coming?" And then Jesus starts what scholars call the Olivet Discourse. Now, like I said at the beginning of this whole series when we talked about terminology, how much of that chapter or those chapters really point to Jesus' second coming depends upon if you're a preterist or a futurist or whatever. That's neither here nor there. I think by reading all of those chapters, we can find the following signs in the Olivet Discourse. And here they are. There will be false Christs, people who claim to be Christ or claim to know who Christ is. There will be wars and rumors of wars. There will be famines. There will be earthquakes. There will be persecution of the church. There will be apostasy. People will fall away from the faith. There will be false prophets. There will be what I call cold love. People will no longer act as loving as they should anymore. There will be strife within families. There will be fearful events and signs from the heavens. And the only positive sign is that the gospel will be preached to all nations. Right? I've provided, you notice, the Bible verses so that if you want to go back and look them all up for yourself, you can. But here's the one thing that I notice every time that I read the Olivet Discourse, and that's how should I put this? How vague all these signs are. I mean, think about it this way. In the past 2,000 years, while we've been waiting for Jesus to return, have there been people that have shown up and claimed to be Jesus when they really weren't? Have there been wars and rumors of wars? Have there been famines? Have there been earthquakes? Has the church been persecuted? Has there been an apostasy? Have there been false prophets? Has love grown cold? Has there been strife within families? Have there been fearful events and signs from the heavens? The answer to that is, yeah, there has. From the moment that Jesus spoke those words up until this very moment now, all of these signs have been fulfilled. Which leads me to wonder, what are the signs really for? Are they there so that we can try to nail down the day and the date, or at least the general year, when Jesus is coming back? Or do they serve another purpose? A couple of weeks ago, another fellow contributor, Casey Hill, and I exchanged some messages back and forth on Facebook, and Casey had some interesting comments about the signs of the times. She said, "It was kind of interesting to me this morning that Jesus' primary concern seems to be to make sure that, number one, his friends don't panic when all this happens. Two, they do what's necessary to stay safe, run for the mountains, pray that it doesn't happen during such and such a time. Number three, that they aren't deceived by all the false Christs and prophets, and that they hang in there until the very end. In other words, what Casey noticed, and I think this is a valid observation, is that Jesus really isn't interested in giving us chart-worthy signs that we can lay it all out and figure out what is going to happen when. Instead, he has some very specific concerns, that people are not freaked out by what happens, that people don't lose faith, that they remain strong and stand firm in the faith until the very end. And I think there's something else to that in the fact that all of those signs are so vague, is the fact that Jesus doesn't want us to be able to nail down when the end is going to be, because he doesn't want us to be complacent. Instead, what he's saying is this: the end is coming, and I want you to live ready. So that when we hear about wars and rumors of wars, we don't say, oh, there's another point of data to put in a chart. Instead, it reminds us that Jesus will come back. That when we hear about the persecution of our brothers and sisters in Christ, we don't say, there's another data point. Instead, we say, yes, it's a reminder that Jesus is coming back. In other words, the signs are there to be a constant reminder to us that we should live ready, because since all the signs have been pretty much fulfilled, it means that Jesus could come back at any moment. And the best thing for us to do is to be prepared. To show you what I mean by that, I want to tell you an apocryphal story about one of my heroes, namely Martin Luther. The story goes that one day somebody came up to Dr. Luther and they asked him a very pointed question. They said, Dr. Luther, what would you do if you found out with absolute certainty that Jesus is coming back tomorrow? Now, they probably thought they knew what Martin Luther would do. After all, Martin Luther, before he kicked off the whole Reformation, was infamous for his hours long that he spent in the confessional, confessing every sin he could think of, to the point where his confessor actually accused him of making stuff up. They probably thought that Luther would go back into the confessional and confess all of his sins and prepare himself, through prayer, through meditation, maybe put on a white robe and go sit on a hillside with a palm branch, something to get himself ready. And according to the story, Luther thought about it, and he said, I would plant an apple tree. Now, that may seem like a very odd statement to make, but the reason why is because that was what Luther was planning on doing the next day anyway. And his point was that for a Christian, the signs of the times should keep us in a constant state of readiness. Instead, there should be no need for last-minute confessions or white robes or palm branches or anything to get us ready. Instead, we should be ready at all times. And so to answer your question, Stephen, we don't have a chart other than we don't know when he's coming back. Instead, what we do have is a list of things to remind us that Jesus Christ is coming back, and he is coming back soon. And it's an encouragement to join in the prayer of the church, the prayer that we've said for the last 2,000 years. Even so, Lord Jesus, come quickly. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.